Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for this session to talk about the latest in debit memos. I hope all of you are familiar with what a debit memo is and what that entails, but I'll give you just a brief overview just in case. The debit memo is truly an invoice that an airline issues to an agency when they find that there's an error in ticketing. So it's kind of like a bill that's coming that you don't really realize is coming. So everybody who's received one is I'm sure, pretty aware of what those are. But for this session, everybody, they were using the app for any questions you may have. So please utilize the latest in debit memos subtitle to submit your question if you're interested in doing so. We're going to get started, but I wanted to introduce my co-panelists up here. I'm Paige Blunt, and I am from ARC, and I'm an industry relationship manager, and I manage the Debit Memo Working Group. To my left is Hope Harper. She's manager from Delta Airlines in the Revenue Protect and Recovery area. And then over here to the far left is Shannon Keever from Alltour, and she manages their entire debit memo process as well. So two ladies who are very vested in the process of debit memos and very knowledgeable and really turning their attention to the process and how to improve it. So we'll get going here. We are going to talk a lot about best practices today. If you're not familiar with our best practices, we went through the theory of best practice quite a long time ago when we started the Debit Memo Working Group in 2013. It was everybody kind of had a vision of wouldn't it be great if there were some sort of boundaries around debit memos, but there weren't at that time. But as we kept moving forward, we did create things like debit memo reason codes, which we are mapping our airlines so that their reasons are actually now in Memo Manager, and we're able to do some querying to be able to better understand, are there more chargebacks, are there more fare-related memos, maybe there are more tax memos, trying to get a handle on some data around them so that we can then be able to help both of our stakeholders, airlines and agencies, to start helping to reduce. So in the Debit Memo Working Group, after those reason codes were implemented, we really thought that there should be the opportunity for now putting some boundaries, some rules around best practices. And so the group decided that we would do that. And in 2017, we spent a very long time, many phone calls, many meetings, conference calls with lots of people on them trying to interject their thoughts on what the key pieces should be. And then we had a separate agent meeting that we went through kind of all of the different categories that we thought potentially could be useful. And they put down kind of their wish list of what they thought would be most beneficial for them. We did the same thing with the airlines, had a meeting, and were able to actually do the exactly same thing, that what's going to be best for us and be working with our partners at the agencies. We really tried to cover all phases of the memo lifecycle and really started out with truly, when a contract's issued, what's going to happen there? Who's going to understand a contract, all the way down to here's how you do training after the memo at the agency to try to not incur that kind of memo again. So as you'll see coming up here, there are a multitude of different opportunities for improvement in the memo scheme. These are guidelines. Let's all understand kind of what these are. They are guidelines. They are not mandates. ARC doesn't do that. ARC doesn't require you to follow these, but these are, just as they are called, the best practice. We don't enforce, however, when we have a problem with an airline maybe who's not answering disputes, we can get with that airline, make a phone call, understand their delay in response, and encourage them to move forward and action their memos, just as they like the agencies to action on their side. And we can do the same thing with agencies as well. So it's definitely a two-way street. It's not focused on one stakeholder or the other. Oh, wow, it's very loud. And we will be benchmarking. We have gotten kind of the first numbers coming through because we did implement these in January of 18. And that really a lot of it is all about timing. So how long does it take for someone to look at a memo, action a memo? Also, we are looking at are there reason codes being used? Are ticket numbers being used? How does the correspondence flow working? So there's a lot of different things that we will be able to benchmark. I really look forward to being able to do that after the first of the year when I have a full year of data. As I say, they were just implemented in January. So there are 4 key areas of focus that we worked on with Debit with the best practices here. The first is around communication and training. That was, as I said, when we start with when the contracts are issued, is your audit team understanding what the contract intent is? I know that there are a lot of times when you're putting a contract in place and the auditing team or the revenue accounting team, whoever handles it at the airline, looks at it and goes, oh, well, I know exactly what this means, and it's X, Y, and Z. And the sales department says, oh, no, it's A, B, and C. So those are the kinds of conversations we're trying to encourage within the airline before the contract goes out to the agent, who may then interpret as it's 1, 2, 3. So we want to be sure that we're trying to incorporate all the stakeholders before we ever have to think about doing an audit on a ticket. And we do obviously encourage training as well. I mean, that's one of the things, encourage training within the agency. I know that there's some post-mortem training as well, but the upfront training, this is the best practice on how to issue a ticket. This is the best way to be able to add your tour code or add your ticket designator, whatever it may be. Does that happen in IAR? Does that happen at the time of ticketing? Then there's different best practices about auditing and memo issuance. How do you audit? If you use a third-party auditor, the third-party auditor should have the same capability as an in-house auditor has. Are you providing those tools as an airline to those third-party auditors? Also, when you're issuing the memo, are they going out with full information? Is it only an attachment? Are you clear and concise on what the debit memo reason is? And is that memo reason really the reason for the memo? You'd be surprised. There are instances where it just misses the mark, and it's usually a keying error. Then there's also debit memo research, and researching a memo takes a long time. And now we have the opportunity in Memo Manager to send the memos out to the GDSs. If it's an automated transaction and it's a fare violation on an automated transaction, the agencies have the ability to submit that to their GDS partner for review. So we want to be sure that they have adequate information as well. This is a 3-stakeholder system, and we like everyone to have the equal opportunity and availability for that communication. And then we look about settlement, and when you pay memos right in Memo Manager, but you also can you dispute in Memo Manager. You're able to request a partial payment via that communication tool. And so there are a lot of different ways that we need to be able to manage the settlement, and a lot of best practices that we put around that. So moving forward, let me hand the microphone here over to Hope Harper from Delta. She's going to talk a little bit about what they've done with their best practices. Hope?
Good morning, and Paige, thank you for having me and be a part of this. I was very excited because Delta is very committed to the whole Debit Memo working group and making better relationships with the agency community and the GDSs and reducing debit memos. It benefits both sides. So the main thing is that we'll work together to continue going forward in the future. But anyway, just to get started on the accomplishments Delta's made, a lot of the aspects of the best practices we already had in place. But there was a lot of other things that we needed to tweak. And I'm going to go over some of those today to let you know what we've been working on and then the results we've seen. We do partner with our sales teams, and we'd like to let sales reps know ahead of time if we see large number of debit memos or high-dollar debit memos for an agency, so they can reach out to their account and let them know this is coming down the pike. Is there anything you can tell us ahead of time that we can resolve up front? We also worked with the sales team and the sales development team on when they're creating new programs and when they're making amendments, because a lot of times our salespeople, we love them to death, but they don't always understand what they're putting in a contract. And there's a lot of gray areas, so we ask that we actually can participate in their development process so we can make sure that the programs are clear and concise. There's no gray areas. that what they want is what they're saying in the program. So we've been really developing those relationships over the past 2 years. Auto-priced errors, we actually vet those out before a memo is ever created. We first go to our fair filing team to make sure that it's not a Delta fair filing error that needs to be corrected immediately. If we see that it is not a Delta error, depending on what kind of contract we have with the GDS, some like to be billed directly, some want us to go through the actual travel agent that issued the ticket. If we see that it's just a one-off error, we will actually issue the memo then and ask the agency to contact their GDS. If it's a large volume, we don't even bring the agency into it. We will go directly to the GDS system and say there's a problem, we need to resolve it quickly and get it corrected, and then we'll resolve the financial impact through our contracts with them. Our fair filing team has done a great job over the past 2 years cleaning up Category 16 so that the text matches Category 31. This has really reduced the number of debit memos that we've seen as a result of that not being in sync. Also, we have a great third-party vendor that we work with. They have a 2-step process for validating. Of course, they have their audit team, then they have their QC team, and then they don't issue our memos for us. They send them to us, and then we have a team that actually validates the memo and decides whether or not it needs to be issued or denied. And I can say with very proudly that we have a 98% accuracy rate on our memo issuance. This past, what was it, late 2016, early 2017, that we completed doing the reason codes. And really, it was not that big of a deal. It was very easy to do. It only took us a couple of days walking through everything. And so I encourage any carriers that have not done it yet to do it. It will really make a big difference, especially when you're trying to, if you have an internal system where you do your own analysis and trying to match back to what's in Memo Analyzer. It's a very big help. As far as chargebacks, now I know that's a huge deal, and hopefully someday in the future we'll get chargebacks under control and the fraud under control. But just to let you know, we do have the pre notification in process for before memos are issued for Diners Club, American Express, Visa, and MasterCard. This is to help avoid debit memos. So if you have some compelling evidence you can send in that will help mitigate issuing that memo, please do. Some facts about what we have in place. Internally, we have SLAs that we work towards, and all my team have goals they have to create every year, and include these SLAs, which are service level agreements. And one of them is that we have to have disputes turned around within 10 days. And right now, they have an average of 8 business days, so they're doing a great job. We have automation in place to identify multiple disputes. So we're set up in ARC that we allow 3 disputes. The first 2 are handled by the team. It's usually just a communication thing where somebody forgets to attach something, whatever. But once the 3rd dispute comes along, it is elevated up to management level to review and to get a response. We also make sure that we issue all ACM requests within 5 business days. Those duplicate payment, if we've issued a memo in error, and you've paid it, we need to return the funds, we have a 5 business day SLA. As a result that we've seen, we use 2015 as a baseline. The first graph you'll see over to your right is the debit memo issuance. You can see in 2015 we had our baseline, and from 2016 to 2018 we've reduced debit memo issuance 52%. Debit memo disputes, have gone down as well. We didn't have a lot of disputes to begin with, but it has reduced since 2016 down 10%. So more agencies are providing valid explanations. When I say that, when they send a dispute, we would get disputes in the past where it says, we don't agree. Well, you need to say why you don't agree, and if you have some support, attach it. It just makes the process go much better. So it reduces, and usually there's just a one dispute, one response, and it's resolved. What we'd like to see more from the travel agency community is, please, we have an agency website that we have all of our debit memo policies, all of our booking and ticketing policies. Go out and look. It's easy to find. We're working to make sure they're all up to date. Every year we go through them and make sure that they're current, they're valid. Nothing has changed. And another thing we'd like is to make sure agencies remember that when you're using a program that has a ticket designator that has to be on the ticket, please make sure you're entering that designator. And I know there's been some concern about with the GDSs when you're auto pricing and then you go and put a designator in, it changes it to manually priced. We know that. We're not holding that. We're not looking at that. So be comfortable putting that designator in. And of course, waiver codes. Delta is creating some tools where we're going to get away from having to enter that manual code. It'll automatically document your P&R when you get your waiver. So that's coming next year sometime. So it will be phased in, so look for that. But until then, please remember to make sure you're putting your waiver code on your ticket, or in the when you're doing a refund or exchange, that you've got your RIN and you've got your waiver code in the waiver code field so that will appear in the RIN. And don't forget to attach complete support. You know, when we create a contract, it may have 10 amendments through the year. So if we've issued a debit memo and you write back, well, we're using this contract, please let us know what amendment so that we can audit to the right amendment. And I know you get a little aggravated when we ask, attach the documentation. Don't copy and paste. I mean, give us the program and the amendment, or just attach that program that you're using and send it. And that's basically what I'm looking for more from travel agency community. As far as GDSs, do we have any GDSs in the room? Okay. Okay. All right. What we need is,
Okay, here you go, right?
Here we go. What we have is our audit team and correspondence team who look at the disputes. So if it's an auto pricing issue and we send it to you, you guys are so up here and we're so down here. And if it's something we can resolve quickly, please put it in layman terms so we understand what you're saying. You can put your coding in, but also break it down in layman's terms for us, the ones that don't do any coding. And it helps us from having to go back to our fair filing team, say, please interpret this for us. So, and that minimizes the amount of time it takes to address disputes as well. And that's pretty much all I've got.
Thank you so much, Hope. Appreciate that. Good job. Okay. Now, Shannon, we'll let you kind of talk about how you're managing best practices.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is my mic working? Hello?
Are you on?
Hello? Oh, there we
Yes.
go. I
There
just
you
have
go.
too much hair. One, I did want to thank Hope and Delta because they are one of the partners, airlines, that it's easier to work with. I appreciate the quick turnaround times. And a lot of best practices is built on that, and those sort of things that we put together to work together to make the whole process work more smoothly. Because nobody likes a debit memo. The quicker they can go away, the better. So I do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I'm with Altour. It's a TMC. We do have a lot of corporate house agents, but we also have a lot of independent contractors. So sometimes that makes it a little bit unique for us as well too, because the independent contractors are also our clients. So we're providing a service to them. prior to doing debit memos, which I've done now for 12 years, I was in the training department. So with best practices, it does really go directly from debit memos to training, because with debit memos, you see what training you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, the programs that you have in place which are working, where you need to make tweaks and things like that. So some things that we found with best practices, one, it's important to dedicate resources. If you don't have enough people or the right people working on debit memos, it's very easy for the number of debit memos to get too large, for them to get very aged, and then it gets really difficult and overwhelming. It really snowballs. In our own experience, I was kind of feeling that pain, and we did bring on another dedicated agent to help, where we're both working full-time with debit memos. And I will say it's been a great help, just even with the volume and with the time turnaround, but also with disputes. Last year, for disputes between the two of us, there was $200,000 or over $200,000 that we saved over memos being closed or memos being reduced. So I think that definitely helps the money that the company is spending to realize there's a return on that money that you spend. We found also it's good, the way that we do it is the people that are reviewing the debit memos have knowledge throughout the agency. I'm quite familiar with the GDS we're using, with the contracts we're using. I have access to the contracts in place. I have access to the last contracts in place, so that I can do a lot of research, and that makes it quite easy, because what we do is we'll send an email to the agent, and we don't just send a copy of the debit memo. We send a full explanation of what happened. So we use that as a training opportunity to not just say, here it is, you figure out what you did wrong, because they may just look at it through the same lens they did originally. So it really helps for us saying, you know, here's where we found the error. And sometimes we can identify where they made the mistake or where they thought they were going the right direction, and make our training programs, our intranet, things like that more clear to help reduce confusion for the agents. So I think we help to save time by that, because we send them very detailed, even copies of the tickets. If there's fare rules, we'll copy the fare rules so that everything's right there, and it's pretty quick for the agent to just say okay to pay, because we've done the research for them. We also do use a lot of tools, pre-ticketing, post-ticketing, especially for commissions, having intranet tools where the agents can access our commissions, and it answers a lot of the common questions. Can you prorate, or child's fares allowed? What about if other airlines? Code shares, all those common questions that come up, they really apply to every contract. So that's important to be clear and accessible. And then we also do use tools from our GDS providers. If you can use automated exchanges, it'll be great when the refunds become automated. I think that will help a lot with debit memos as well too. We also do have support staff. I pretty much have everybody scared of getting a debit memo. So when in doubt, they always can reach out to our support staff, even just for a second set of eyes, and I think that helps a lot of people. And one thing I've found helpful for reducing debit memos, or the time frame, is having a strict timeline for review. So normally when I'll email our agents, I'll give them a 2-week, or maybe it would be till the end of the following week to respond. And if it's commission related and they haven't responded, we'll proceed with payment. And if it's not commission related, I'll pay the following week, but I send an email saying, hey, this is being paid this week unless you let me know. I used to be in the habit of kind of waiting for a response, and especially since we work with a lot of independent contractors, and I found that helped the process get longer and longer. And once we got firm deadlines and I stuck to it, I think that really helped the process for us. And I think that's right for me.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that there's some definite key items that are focused on. The chargebacks are one, right? And the ticket designators. I think some airlines are very specific about their designators to be able to apply commission or a discount for a corporate contract. The waivers are always a big challenge, I think. We're really having another little task force to start talking about waivers and things that revolve around IROP and sched change. So that's a new focus for us. And the dispute communication, I think, has gotten better with this process, with the best practice implementation, because, again, as Hope said, she used to get things that said, I dispute. I don't agree. Well, that really isn't helpful. We know you don't probably agree, but tell us why you don't agree.
And that works on both sides. You
Okay.
know, like I hate when I hear an agent does that,
Yeah.
you know, because that's not good. And then also on the flip side, for carriers, we may provide information, but they really don't address anything that we said. So on both sides, you know, address why the memo was issued, why you believe it's not. And on the flip side, if we're disputing, you know, please address what we put in our dispute, and it helps that process go
And don't
much
keep
faster.
saying the same thing over and over.
Yes.
Right.
yes.
Yes. That is a key right there.
Right.
I've seen many times where, and on both sides, where it's been the exact same. It's like copy paste, and it just went back into the dispute. That just is a time suck. It's just bad.
Right.
Okay. So I have some questions that I'm going to kind of ask these ladies, and if you have questions to ask, I can give you this again if you want to go to this particular current session title, and you can submit your question. We'd love to have it. But I have some that I've already prepared because I thought maybe you all would like to understand that. Kind of what was your motivation to really put the best practice together? You both were in the group for the entire year and all of those conference calls and meetings. Lots of input and 100% appreciate that. But kind of what was your particular motivation to put best practice together?
I guess for me and for Delta, it was to have not just structure in what we do, but also to help agencies understand our structure and ask that they also have some structure in place. I mean, I know that there's so many different sizes of carriers as there are travel agents, and it's not always easy. You don't have as many employees as the smaller ones don't have as many as the larger, and it's difficult. But to just have some best practices out there to try to create this structure so that we're working together, we're trying to resolve issues quickly as we can, and to make the whole process better, and not just to make the debit memo process, but to eliminate some of these debit memos that we're seeing.
Great. Thanks, Jen.
And I think in the Debit Memo Working Group, we're not just trying to figure out what we can do amongst each other. It's like, what can we do for the industry? So a lot of the people in the group are kind of following best practices already, but how can you share what we're doing and what we're successful with the whole community? And I think we're hearing that people are accessing it. I know that ARC is emailing it out, publishing it, it's getting attention, and the more people that are looking at it, and it's a pretty simple guideline to follow and steps to follow, and the more people we can get participating, the better. And any questions that agencies, carriers have, if they can bring that to us, that's wonderful
Yes,
as well.
I mean, we're always looking for, because not every agency, not every airline sits on the Debit Memo Working Group, but we welcome questions. We welcome you to come and visit with us, and we'll try to address whatever your issue might be. We do have a kind of a waiting list for the working group now because it has grown so much, but we welcome your questions. We'd love
Paige,
to have it.
I'll just
Yeah.
say, and we're not just trying to represent our own interests.
Right.
So even though you may not be there, your interests are being represented at the group, because we do want to consider agencies of all size. There's
Right.
online travel
Exactly.
agencies, small agencies, TMCs, but we've got all of their concerns.
And all this aside, we don't want to issue debit memos. We Delta would like to have the correct amount of the sale up front, just like you would like to make sure that sale is correct at the time you make it, and you're not going to see a debit memo on the back end. I may be talking myself out of a job, but that's what my job is to make this as easy and painless and accurate as possible.
Do you have some questions? Thank you. This one's for Hope, for Delta. Are your JV partners aligned with Delta in these best practices?
We work very closely with our JV partners, and Lily is here from Air France this week. But we do work very closely to align not just our policies and procedures, but the audit as well, so that and it is an ongoing process because something always pops up that we didn't think about. But we are working on it and continue to work on it.
Okay.
So if you see anything that looks different, let us know.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things is that if you're seeing different, as you said, communicate. Well, let's make that a better situation, and hopefully, when again, we can't enforce the rule. I mean, it's not a rule; it's a best practice, so we can't enforce. But there's definitely some helpful hints and suggestions, and some customer contact we can reach out. The next one is for Delta, saying best solution ever. Woo woo, go Delta.
Oh,
Um, uh, where can people get the best practices guide? It's on our website at arccorp.com/debit memos, and you should be able to find it there. If for some reason you cannot find it, please reach out to the customer care center, and they can help you find it. Right, Joy? Or you can reach out to me directly, and my email, I think, is actually in the Travel Connect app. How can an airline be a part of Debit Memo Working Group? Please reach out to me. Like I say, we do have a waiting list for the working group, but we do make rotations. So if you'd like to be a part of that and get your name added to that list, love to have it. Please contact me, and I will happily have a conversation and see what we can do. Okay. How can we get more involved in the whole movement to reduce debit memos, especially chargebacks? And that's apparently more focused on you.
you know, the fraudsters just keep on coming up with new ideas, and it does make it very difficult. Due diligence is all I can say, and that we work together to try and minimize what we're seeing. If your gut tells you don't do it, don't do it. And they're just smart. I'm so naive sometimes when I see some of these schemes they come up with. I'm like, who would ever think of that? But like I say, just do your due diligence. If you don't feel right about the transaction, don't do it. As soon as you find out a transaction is fraudulent, call your local police department, file a police report, contact Delta. Delta will then go in and suspend any unused coupons. We just have to work together. It's going to be, and as soon as we solve one type of fraud, there's going to be another. So I'm hoping the card companies are coming up with some great ideas to help us mitigate a lot of this. And it's just one of those things I think we're probably going to have to live with, whether it's a little or a lot. But we're only going to conquer it if we work together.
I will say there's a lot of steps the carriers are doing too to help us with friendly fraud. Like Hope was referring to about sending an email out in advance, because usually it's still within that window of time where we can contact the client and have them remove a dispute. And friendly fraud isn't that kind of fraud, but they don't recognize the charges or something like that, or it's a company.
They just wanted they didn't fly, and it's a non-refundable, and they want to get the refund.
And sometimes they were waiting for a refund, and our agent hasn't refunded it yet, or
just
things
make sure
like that.
you document when you're selling to a customer and it's a non-refundable, that you have it documented. They were told it was a non-refundable fare. So that is some compelling evidence.
But we can avoid many of those debit memos now in advance by the steps that you're doing and some other carriers are doing, reaching out to us.
Right.
And I think that was part of the chargeback group, part of the debit memo working group. So
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. And there's also the opportunity for agencies to utilize 3D Secure. We now can take it. We now can take in the 3D Secure data when it comes in on the SPUR file. The GDSs are getting there. They're not quite finished with their process yet, but that is also a helpful way to really try to identify the customer that you're working with. So you might want to check with your GDS on whether or not they're able to pass that information and whether or not you can utilize that internally. Another one, let's see, where's the industry heading regarding debit memos to quote-unquote abusive behaviors such as inactive segments, churning, duplicate bookings, and how can we reduce these?
For Delta, on our agency website under Policy Library, you will see all of our policies. You'll see one related to booking, and that has all your information about churning, what it is, dupe bookings, fictitious names, all of that. And then there's a separate one for married segment abuse. and some good news is that on front for Delta is that we've done some enhancements to our automation, which has identified marriage segment abuse up front. So we're seeing a great decline in marriage segment abuse memos. Also, we've tweaked a lot of our robotics related to your booking on your churning and stuff like that. So you should see a decline in that as well. But yes, it's out there under the agency website under policy library.
And I do see a trend going that direction as well too.
Mhm.
We're seeing more and more of those booking violation type debit memos. Those seem to be common. So it's good to obviously work with your agents on training and identifying what is churning, things like that, and avoiding those practices.
I think churning is one of those difficult ones because different airlines identify those differently. Sometimes it's if you rebook in 3 times. Sometimes it's you rebook once. So I think that you really need to check the policy for a particular airline if you're seeing an increase in volume of memos. Check their policy or reach out to your contact at that airline to understand exactly what the policy is for them. Great, thank you. Another one, does ARC have plans to include agency contact information, especially for chargebacks, debit memos on the carrier dashboard? Well, glad you asked. We are just beginning some testing on our project for getting the carrier contact the agency contact information. And this, we expect to hopefully put this into place at the end of first quarter, beginning of second. And it will be basically offering different types of contact information, or email is what we're focused on right now, for different areas within an agency, just for that exact reason, so that an airline can contact an agency for an issue. We brought up in the working group, the Debit Memo working group, which was earlier this week, that they would like to also see that in place for carriers and for GDSs. So this is something that we'll take back and try to look at how we could potentially put that into place as well. But the agency contact information is our one that we've been working on for quite a while now, and we look to implement that. So yes, you should have information on that as soon as the agencies get it loaded, and obviously then until we get it out. So thank you for the question.
Paige, I just wanted to say that ARC's been very helpful in the whole debit memo process as well. I know when I first started doing debit memos, I was scanning them, and even you get the pages stuck together and all this stuff. So having an online product has made it so much better. The Debit Memo Working Group has made things better. They're always looking at ways to improve Memo Manager. And then even for me, when we're talking about the dispute process, there's new emails that are coming out to advise when correspondence has been received. So that's really easy, makes it easier for us to action when Delta's responded to a dispute, so I can see that right away versus having to manually go in and search to see if you've responded. So there's a lot of great tools, and it seems like it's continually improving over time, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's what we try. We're here for our customers, and we try to give the best product that we possibly can. We can't always get all the enhancements at the right time for everyone, but we are working towards that always. And I agree. Thank you. I think we've seen some vast improvements in, how fast things are turning around. The whole fact that there is a standard out there for submitting debit memos in the U.S. market is huge. I think that there's been some great help from our partners as well to really embrace those the opportunities that we give them. So thank you. Appreciate it. Where are we? Let's see on time. Hang on. Sorry. Okay. In an instance where a multi-carrier ticket is debited and it is determined that one carrier filed a fare incorrectly, do you issue the memo to the agency or contact the carrier in question to work out a memo?
Well, when we audit, we only audit our own ticket stock. So if there is an issue with, and we have the ticketing agreement and all that with, and there's a segment on the ticket that is another carrier, that's probably handled through the interline process. If it's, especially if it's the particular type fare it is, but a lot of times we get requests to issue memos from interline that come over to us that say, there seems to be a problem with this fare. Can you research it for us? Have Nina here. She'll attest to that. We get a lot of requests for research. And then we determine whether or not we need to issue a debit memo.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Next one is, does ARC have a plan to move to an automated billing for ADM payments, same as BSP? The answer is no. We are not the BSP. We do not auto draft or auto pay memos at all. So no, that's a definite no. And then late voids accepted by carriers in GDSs, but added as a refund in IAR, resulting in a memo due to non-refundable rule. How can we handle this issue? And unfortunately, I think, well, I'll let you try to talk to it, unless you prefer.
Well, I think there's a timing issue involved, and it happens right there at the time for closing out for the week. So it turns into a manual process. But there is a report that the carriers get, a manual void report, and it lets us, and it is a manual audit for us, but we review, but there's not that many, but we review all the manual transactions made to look for, was it voided and flown, and, okay, go ahead, Joy.
Okay, Joy.
Oh, okay. All right. There's two different things then.
Right. What she's saying is that there's a identifier that we put into a field that will indicate to the airline that it is a late void, and the airline should be seeing that file, and then they bring it in. Yes. For sure.
Yes.
And if for some reason, if the person that's asking that has a very particular question, I'm happy to talk with you, and I can bring Joy into the conversation.
And I would say we get a couple of debit memos related to that every once in a while. It's like a non-refundable ticket was refunded, and normally we will just dispute and say it was refunded after 10, after the ARC file was sent, and it's reported as a refund, but it's actually a void. And then usually the e-ticket will also show void, so we'll submit a copy of that where the e-ticket shows void, and we've had success with those being closed when they've been received.
Right.
Okay, great. We just have a couple more minutes, so one thing I did want to ask, we had it was a challenge, but we, had lots of meetings, got lots of best practices out there for the debit memo process. Is there anything else that you might think that best practices could pertain to from the debit memo working group? Just thoughts.
Gosh, we have so many things on the drawing board right now. And we always think of something every time we get together, something else we want to add, something else we want to add. So it's like a living document type thing that just keeps growing arms and legs. Off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of anything right at this moment other than I want to continue the work on the fare filings on the different categories, making sure all of that works as it should. It's consistent. We've got all the auto refunds, auto exchange tools, making sure that those are working in conjunction with the carriers, and that the end result is correct. It's a nightmare when you're trying to figure all that out when something fails. So that's one of the top things that I want to be done.
Okay.
And the debit memo working group is having a subgroup meeting on schedule changes and EROPS, and they were talking about maybe a best practices for that, because carriers do different things. Like the more that we can kind of agree on a good way to handle things, and more we can standardize it, will reduce confusion, and hopefully not only for debit memos but for customer experience as well too.
Right.
Okay, two more questions did come in. Why is it that ARC doesn't auto draft like BSP does? It's just because we're a very different organization. Basically our system is a reporting tool. It's not an invoicing tool, and that it's not part of our policy. The other question was, how, Delta, have you had success in reducing the churning? You were talking about the churning memos.
We had automation in place and when I say booking, it's not just churning. It's fictitious names, duplicate P&Rs, things like that. So we really worked on our automation to identify that stuff up front and stop it before it results in a ticket. So it's just a lot of working with that and to have better automation in place. Churning, we do have a minimum before a memo is issued, and that's six cancels and rebooks within the same P&R or across multiple.
There, you heard it.
So
And
you
I
heard
do-
it.
I
Heard
do
it.
appreciate that Delta has a clear policy because
Mhm.
a lot is excessive. And you're like, well,
Right.
what is excessive?
Yeah.
Right.
So, the more carriers that had clear policies on that
Right.
would be good too.
I agree. Okay, well, thank you, ladies, so much for your time and all your information. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.